Everybody, welcome to Art History 100 at Fullerton College. Today I'm going to go over the first part of our class. Now, depending on whether you're in a fall class or a summer class or a 16-week class or an 8-week class, the way that the information is divided here could be different. So I'm going to break these lectures down to about 1-hour lectures and give them to you in the chunks that would normally be in a 16-week class. So I'm going to start with the Living with Art lecture. Then I'm going to talk about cave art and shaman. We will have a discussion on cave art and shaman. There's a video I would like you to watch. And there's also a website that has the entire cave art from Chevi, that is the Sistine Chapel of cave art, made approximately 30,000 years ago to around 20,000 years ago. Then there will be a lecture assessment for you to do. This assessment is pretty simple. It's asking you what you learned in the readings that you did or any videos that I show you, and it's also asking you what your favorite part is. When I do the second lecture, I'll do the second part that is here in week 1, and I'll go over what is art and then the discussion on animals in art. So, getting started. By the way, my name is Mike Hansen, and I am your professor for this class. And I hope you have a very good time with it. I'm an artist, and I like to go painting at night at the Sunken City and experience art very similar to the kind of cave art that we're going to study today. So the first chapter that we're studying from a book called Living with Art, we are studying the first chapter of that book, also titled Living with Art. So there are 2 pictures here that I start out with. On the left, we are at the Eli Broad Museum at LACMA. There is also a Eli Broad Museum in downtown Los Angeles on Grand Avenue that houses his permanent collection. Eli helped to build one of the buildings at LACMA, the LA County of Museum Art, and we are on the 3rd floor of that in the left-hand picture. And on the right-hand picture, we are in a retail store and art gallery in downtown Santa Ana in California. 2 very different, but I think 2 different ways that people see art that is very common. So on the left, you're looking at a building built specifically for art. The building has light coming in from the ceiling, but not too much light. It has expensive track lighting. The ceilings look to be maybe 15 feet tall to get massive works of art in. They also have a huge elevator for that. In the floor, there is a vent. That vent is making sure that air is being pumped in that doesn't have any moisture in it, so no mold will grow on these paintings. What we're looking at in that photograph is an Ellsworth Kelly, a minimalist painter from the 1950s and 60s. This is another Ellsworth Kelly here, and then this looks like a comic book style Roy Lichtenstein in the back. I would say the total value of these paintings is somewhere around $100 million. Notice that when you go to an art museum and you have this kind of prestigious artwork, they don't put a lot of artwork around it. They leave the walls kind of empty and allow you to really contemplate the artwork. Now that experience is very different than the salon-style hanging that we're seeing here in Santa Ana. You can tell that this is a converted store, not made specifically to see art. Wooden floors here. The lighting There's a little bit of track lighting here. There's also a chandelier and some lamps. It's kind of ad hoc put together. And then the paintings, well, they're hung very close and as many as they can on the wall. It's a retail store. They're, I imagine, paying rent by the square foot, and they're trying to have as many things to sell in the store as possible. Now, these paintings probably are done by local artists. I would guess perhaps these paintings might sell for a couple $100s. So the difference between hundreds of millions and maybe a total of a couple $1,000s in the store in Santa Ana. So I think this is two ways that people view art. Number one, you have expensive art museums, you have retail galleries that are very prestigious, especially in Los Angeles. And then in Orange County in Santa Ana, a place that's trying to kind of rebuild itself through art, bringing art in, having at times where you can go and have art walks, and also lots of public art. They're using art as a way to get people into the business district and then to see how nice the business district is becoming. Maybe you go to a restaurant, maybe listen to some live music, maybe you go to another retail store. One of the ways that art is being used, and art is, again, all around us. So we view and judge art through aesthetics, which is a branch of philosophy that is concerned with feelings aroused in us by sensory experiences, and these experiences that we have through sight and hearing and taste and touch and smell. So aesthetics is concerned with our responses to this natural world and the world that we make. So how does art affect us through these senses? And mainly, we see art through the eyes. A lot of painting, a lot of sculpture and printmaking, but there is also art that you can touch. There is art that you can eat. There is sound art. And definitely there is art sometimes that smells either good or it smells bad. But mostly I think when we're looking at the fine art world, we're probably using our eyes. Why do we make art? So in the impulse for art here, the title of the slide, we're looking at an image of cave art. And here, let me see if I can blow this up a little for you. So here we're looking at a number of heads of cave lions. The male lions didn't have manes. We've discovered that through the cave. So they're making these images 30, maybe 25,000 years ago, kind of continually in this cave. There's poisonous gas in the cave as well that might be causing them to hallucinate. And then around 20,000 years ago, the cave is sealed, and no human beings walk in that cave until 1994. When the cave is rediscovered, this 30,000-year-old art is untouched and looks as if perhaps maybe it was painted very recently. So this mural is kind of the star of the cave. And in the back of the cave, too, you have to walk through a lot of art to find it. So these cave lions, they made them by, first of all, wiping off the yellow calcite, which is a mineral-rich water that is dripping down the cave for millions of years. It's soft. You can actually finger flute and make art into it that is kind of a relief engraving. And then what they did is they took the calcite off on the wall in places to turn the wall white. And in turning the wall white, they then took wood that they burnt and they made contour lines that show us the three-dimensional forms, also outlines that show us two-dimensional forms. They're using some sort of pelt with the charcoal and their burnt wood, and they're rubbing it on in places in the lions, and they're also rubbing it on in the woolly rhinoceroses here. So this brilliant kind of ensemble is made more clear by getting rid of a yellow wall, making the wall white, and the value then of the black is standing out more. And this ensemble of lions is focused completely on all of the animals that are over here. The animals which mostly seem to be moving in this one direction. Probably this is not done by one artist, but maybe many artists, and possibly over thousands of years. That is not that uncommon. There are woolly mammoths, there are woolly rhinoceros, and a particular marking on the woolly rhinoceros that exists in cows in the ARTH in France where this is found, a very unique kind of marking. We're also seeing an outline of a large horned deer-like animal, and this animal has 3 back legs. And the 3 back legs may be implying motion. So in this dark cave, you would have to come in with torchlight and probably several people. The torchlight would be held behind you as your shadow is being cast on the wall, and also the torchlight is making the little divots in the wall, the ins and outs of the wall, flicker, and the shadows are flickering. And possibly that flickering is why we see sometimes this idea of movement in these animals, almost like a proto-cartoon. Pretty amazing stuff for being 30,000 years old. So not only do we have that urge to smudge soot on walls, we also have that urge to pile stone on stone. So we see this happening in the Neolithic age and also in the Bronze Age, maybe a little bit in the Paleolithic age, the Old Stone Age, the New Stone Age, and then the Age of Metallurgy. So this is Stonehenge in Great Britain. These stones you're looking at are massive. Here's some people in relationship to them, some of them weighing 50 tons. They were cut and quarried, and then they were dragged maybe up to 100 miles away up this hill, and then formed into a number of circles. They are standing them upright, and then they are also making a lintel, a horizontal connection between the stones. And we're not 100% sure even what this site is. There is no writing from the site, and there's not a lot of burials there either. So it's not a massive burial site. It may be some sort of temple, some sort of religious site. And the stones that are in the circle, there are stones that reflect light at key times during the year, like the solstices, the warm or the longest day of the year and the shortest day of the year. These days are key when we have settled down and become farmers in the Neolithic age, knowing from the shortest and longest days of the year when to plant seed is really critical for that seed turning into crops. So we're already looking at painting and sculpture in our first couple slides. Now, in our textbook, there's a section titled, What Do Artists Do? And this meme here is kind of silly. It shows us what my friends think I do, what my parents think I do, what society thinks I do, what I think I do, and what I really do. So my friends think I'm in an art class with paper and charcoal, drawing the figure, very typical at any college, university in the art department. My parents think I'm just a kid drawing with crayons, which I think personally is more fun than just drawing the figure in class. We're seeing Snoop Dogg there on stage smoking something. Society thinks us artists are probably burnouts. And then what I think I do, this is a clip from a movie about Michelangelo titled The Agony and the Ecstasy. and you are looking at Charlton Heston mixing paint and feverishly painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. I think many artists, we think that we are making great things and maybe we are geniuses that nobody can understand. And then the last slide, what I really do, and we see a guy holding a sign that says, "Hire me." And that, in a nutshell, is probably what artists are, certainly in the world of memes. But our author also has some other ideas. So artists create places for some purpose. We might find this in architecture, which we'll be looking at in a chapter. And then here we're looking at war memorials, 2 of them. So the right war memorial is from the Korean War, and we are seeing a typical war memorial before the Vietnam Memorial of cast bronze, and this cast bronze is probably life-size, maybe even bigger, and we are seeing naturalistic representations of a tired soldier who's taken his helmet off. Behind him are his comrades in arms. They have their weapons, and they are moving quickly and carrying a wounded comrade with them. So they are doing heroic things, and we are seeing their heroism. On the left, a memorial created for the Vietnam veterans by Maya Lin, a Chinese artist living in America. This is a memorial that it was really different from how memorials typically looked. So rather than the heroic, naturalistic, human-like figures, we are seeing a type of mausoleum that has been cut into ground. So the memorial is above ground and below ground at the same time. There is highly polished stone, and that polished stone has names inscribed in the wall that go from American dead from the beginning to the end of the war. So you can go and visit this site as a memorial to a family member who died in the war. You can see their name in the stone and also see your own face in the stone at the same time. You can see the family resemblance. You, in other words, can see the living and the dead at the same exact moment. And you can see also the way this memorial is pointing to another memorial, the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., kind of aligning itself with a giant obelisk that we know from being around Washington, D.C. for a long time, that is remembering the founding father, George Washington. Second thing that artists do is create extraordinary versions of ordinary objects. So on the left, we are looking at a kente that is woven with hundreds of patterns, each pattern with its own name, history, and symbolism. And these blankets are not only able to keep a body warm, but also are ornamental, and also that is a type of art that people can read if they know the code and the symbolism in the code. On the right is a Olga Komandoros, a graduate of UCLA. This is tail end, a garden hose and a garden hose holder, and it's painted gold. This is a piece from a larger art project that she did where she took over an abandoned house and painted it, the roof gold, painted a rainbow throughout the house, and held public art showings in the house. And then when the bank took over the house, she was kicked out, and then she took certain pieces that became sculptures. And those sculptures then were shown at the Suzanne Vielmetter Gallery. And this is one of those sculptures, this garden hose here, which has now become a very valuable original Olga Komandoros It has a history behind it. It also has a sculptural quality to it. And its gold is probably symbolic of the golden dreams of the family who bought the house, but ultimately lost the house in the housing collapse of 2007. Artists record and commemorate, especially before photography. Painters it was important that they painted in a fairly realistic and naturalistic style so they could take accurate portraits of people, and then they could also record scenes in history. Mostly we record and commemorate with video and photography today. This is John Trumbull's The Declaration of Independence from 1776. It is oil on canvas, commissioned in 1817 and purchased in 1819. So this would have been painted approximately 40 years after the event. It's unlikely that the artist was there. What he had to do was to go and find portraits that had been painted. He had to get accounts of what the signing of the Declaration of Independence looked like, and then he has inscribed his own feelings about the Declaration of Independence. So we're seeing the signers of the Declaration, the framers of the Declaration. We are also seeing who it's given to, with John Hancock. Thomas Jefferson is there. I see Ben Franklin. And everybody is in their best clothing. They are in their wigs, I guess, or their hair is pulled back. Everything is neat, everything is orderly, and there is a type of light that is coming in that is very dramatic, almost as if God is in this room and God is approving of these guys stealing land from the British, who also stole land from Native Americans. In other words, it's making this revolution not look like an act of terrorism against the British, but instead look like it is about law and order and ordained by these deists who believe in fate. The deists believe that God created the earth, and then in the Enlightenment, they come to this conclusion that that's all God does. You're on your own, and God is everywhere. God is in the sunlight. God is in nature. And I think we're seeing that kind of inscription of that sort of fate. And again, this shining eye of God in this moment is what I interpret going on here. Artists give tangible form to the unknown. So they might visualize poetry or mathematical principles or give human form to abstract ideas. That's going on the right with the Sandro Botticelli, an artist from the Florentine Renaissance. This is the Birth of Venus from 1486. On the right, you have Zephyrus, the god of winds, and they are carrying them a gentle breeze. The Venus is on the right. The winds are on the left here. And they are carrying a gentle breeze, and then they are blowing Venus, the goddess of love, ashore, who is modestly kind of holding her breasts and putting her hair over her pubic bone. So the zephyrs are blowing the goddess of love in a conch shell, very vulvic, to the goddess of spring to be clothed. So spring has a human form, love has a human form, and the winds have a human form here. On the left, this is a Matthew Ritchie. This is an installation. He is trying to show us how the subatomic world looks. He is showing us things like the Big Bang and other forms in science, making the invisible visible with paintings and installations that he does that are very abstract, very beautiful, but also have a scientific rigor behind them. Another thing that artists do is they give tangible form to feelings and ideas. Here is Vincent van Gogh in his Starry Night from 1889. It is oil on canvas. So he is trying to make us feel something here. So Van Gogh, who was a troubled artist, also suffered from mental illness. He is in an asylum that he checks himself into every now and then. And we are seeing a swirling sky, thickly painted, and the sun is so bright, it's almost, or the moon is so bright, that it's almost as if it's daytime and not nighttime. The winds are swirling, the stars are blinking brightly. Van Gogh was a part of a Protestant religion that believed that when you died, that your soul became stars in the heavens. We see this big cypress tree on the left kind of cutting the canvas into a larger section and a smaller section. And then also we see the Protestant church, very typical in Dutch paintings. Van Gogh is Dutch. And in Dutch landscape paintings, you often see churches with a steeple that is grounded on the earth, but then pierces into the sky. And normally that piercing is a kind of metaphor for the church being part of the earth and part of the heavens at the same time. We are getting here through the exaggeration of light and form, perhaps a troubled mind of Vincent. Artists also refresh our vision. They allow us to see the world in new ways. So we might walk by a street corner and not see the possibility for art. Or in this case, by David Hockney, he took what appears to be a couple hundred photographs, printed them in paper, and then laid them out next to each other. And this becomes this giant photo made out of hundreds of photos of the Pear Blossom Highway out here by California 138 in the middle of the desert. And this may have been a place that is pretty desolate, a place where you're on your way to somewhere else and you don't want to break down out here. And you might not spend a lot of time really taking in the entire landscape. And you can see the landscape is flat, the landscape is desolate, the blue light of the sky brings a lot of color in. And it's almost like a cubist painting, how the rectangles are somewhat dictating how we see the reality of the perspective and the landscape. So artists and creating and creativity. So are artists more creative than other people? I don't believe so personally. So what is creativity? It has been broadly defined as the ability to produce something that is both innovative and useful within a given social context. Artists redefine problems and seek connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. They tend to have a playful side, but they are also capable of long periods of intense and concentrated work. They take risks, remain open to experience, and do not feel restricted by existing knowledge or conventional solutions. And I say that the way that you become more creative is to do creative things. In the same way, if you want to be better at hitting a golf ball or shooting a basketball, you do it all the time and you naturally get better at it. And I think the two illustrated points here, I think we're seeing the possibility for art in places we might not normally see them. On the left is by the artist Banksy in Los Angeles. He had painted the red parking sign on the wall. Then he took out the ing with white paint, turning it into a park. And then he made a stencil, black and white stencil, of a little girl swinging from the crossbar in the letter A, turning this parking lot into a fun place, a park. Now, the anonymous artist on the right, what they did is saw the possibility for the wall with the tree to become a natural, to become an afro, to become a hairstyle. So they simply painted the face there, and I think the green lips are a really nice touch. And so this entire area now becomes hair and face. And even if that painting was taken off because it didn't belong there, if you walk by that wall and you saw the tree as a hairstyle, you will always remember that as a tree and also a hairstyle. We kind of reinvented the space. So part of what we do in art is we're looking and we're responding. So the looking part is how our eyes take in information, how our brain interprets it, and then how we feel about those things. We might get different feelings from different images that we could love or hate. So we're looking at Claude Monet in the bottom three images. This is a cathedral that he painted at various times of the year, various times of the day. When he paints the image on the left, it looks like it could be sundown or sun up. We have a yellowish light on the cathedral. The one in the middle, the cathedral has a reddish quality to it. Maybe there is a reddish sky, or this is a different time of sunup or sundown with a red light. And then we're seeing the typical daytime version with the white hot light of the sun, and it's reflecting on the stone to make it whitish. So it's the same exact subject matter, but has different color and different feelings depending on the time of the day or the time of the year that it's made. The last slide, we're looking at some Vanitas. So these Vanitas are series of paintings made particularly by the Spanish in the 15 and 1600s. This painting here from 1660 on the left, we are seeing what a Vanitas typically is made up of. We are seeing books, we are seeing wealth in terms of coins. We see a candle that is lit. The longer the candle, the idea is the longer the artist's life is. We're seeing the artist in a mirror here, young and handsome. We are also seeing mythological character here in the cherub. And then also in this artwork, we are saying that the artist is young, the artist is good looking, the artist is smart, the artist has money, but the skull is what the Vanitas is all about. These vanities mean nothing compared to the spirit, and that one should keep their religion and their spiritual house in order because death can come at any time. The painting on the right is done not in oil, but is an airbrush painting by Audrey Flack. In Audrey Flack, her Wheel of Fortune, Vanitas, we see a picture of Audrey as she's young. We see a candle that is very short here. Perhaps she thinks she's going to die young. We see lipstick, we see fruit, we see maybe tarot cards, and then we also see the skull, and the skull perhaps reflecting on its own mortality. And again, a different way of showing the same content, but artists can take similar genres like Vanitas and show them to us in many, many different ways. So that is the Living with Art lecture. In your Living with Art lecture, I want you to tell me what your favorite work of art is, what made it so, answer the question thoroughly, make sure that you're really getting in depth with how you feel about the work. And then for the question 2 through 5, I want you to thoroughly explain 4 things you've learned about art in this lecture, from watching my lecture and reading the lecture slides. Now also, in terms of what you learned, you can also talk about what we're also going to have our discussion on. And our discussion is going to be on Paleolithic art, cave art, and shamanism. So the Paleolithic period is a time period of human development from early humans from around 2.6 million years ago to about 10,000 years ago. During the Paleolithic period, we are grouping in small societies. We are gathering plants and fishing and hunting and scavenging for wild animals. We are making stone tools, but we're also using bone and stone tool and wood tools as well. In the lower Paleolithic, Homo erectus probably invented rafts around 800,000 years ago. In the upper Paleolithic, or the Paleolithic closer to our time period, we see nets being made around 29,000 years ago, bolas and spear throwers. A spear thrower is a bone that you attach to a wooden spear that allows you to throw the spear longer and harder. The bow and arrow is made around 25 to 30,000 years ago, and dogs are being domesticated between 30 and 40,000 years ago, probably to aid in hunting and to ward off animals. In the top image, we are also living through these ice ages. And in these ice ages, there's a lot of fresh water, but it's also very cold. And this is an age of megafauna, where we are seeing really big animals, woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, cave lions, and we are hunting some of these animals, and other of these animals are hunting us. The animals that we're hunting, we are eating their meat to survive, we are using their bones to make tools and shelters, and we are also clothing ourselves in animal pelts. So we are not weaving clothes yet, we are simply wearing the hides of other animals for warmth. So we are Homo sapiens, and it was thought until very recently that of all the different human species before us, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, for example, that they did not make art, that they did not have the capacity for symbolic types of behavior. We now realize that that's simply not true. And we have found various forms of Neanderthal art from various forms of dating. We have gone into a cave from 200,000 years ago in Europe, way before we believe that modern humans were in Europe, and saw where stones had been broken and turned into circles. Nothing that was done by nature could have only been done by human beings. We have also dated some cave paintings. The image on the right comes much later, but the ladder form and then the dots here were made about 65,000 years ago, probably around 20,000 years before modern humans make their way to Europe. So making symbolic images, whether it might be sculptural or painted, is something that humans do regardless of what species of humans they may be. Now, these cave paintings, I think what makes them really special is how we go into these caves and we use the cave to either guide us in how to make the work or inspire us in what we're making in the work. So, for example, this ibex that we're seeing here with the ram's horns, we can see that they have drawn a contour line for the back leg, for the tail, for the dorsal line, for the head and the front leg. But then this area they haven't drawn. But you can tell there are shadows being made by the rock formation here and another shadow here. And probably if you move your torch, the shadows would move, which might make this animal appear to be walking. I think another really excellent example from Peck Merle about, 20,000 years ago are the spotted horses. So the spotted horses are made by blowing discs. The paint is blown on, And then probably an animal pelt is used to make the mane of the horse. So we have the head of the horse here, the mane of the horse here, the back dorsal line here, and the thin legs in the front, the two thin legs in the front, no hooves. And then the horse is decorated and spotted. There are also some hand stencils here that probably are made by the artist, kind of a signature before writing. What I think is most amazing, though, is how the head of the horse is made. The artist did not chip away at this stone in the cave. Instead, this is a natural stone formation that probably provided the artist with the inspiration to begin to make the horse. We will be going into Chevi Cave. I've talked a bit already about the Cave Lion mural. Of course, early art, we see these hand stencils made by blowing materials, whether it's charcoal or ochres or clay, over a hand to give us a kind of early tag. And these are some of the earliest images that we found. The earliest images that we often find are blown discs and then also handprints. And then all of the animals that we find in the Paleolithic world from around 30,000 to 20,000 years old, almost all of them are animals. We really don't see human images very much. And it could be because maybe our shadows are interplaying with the artwork and we're not thinking about drawing the art possibly. This is an owl at Chevi made by finger fluting. So that yellow calcite, as I said, that they rubbed off the wall to make the black charcoal stand out more, they also can make art with no materials other than their fingers. So the calcite is soft before it turns into a hard rock, and the artist here has made a simple head, a triangle for a nose, a couple of ears, and then use their fingers to pull down to make the wings. It's a very simple but very clear rendition of an owl made at least 20,000 years ago, and so simple it looks like it could be modern art today. Now, the oldest cave art, it keeps getting further back in time. We have found art in Indonesia that is 45,000 years old. There is a pig that was made. But before the discovery of Lascaux in 1994, or of Chevi in 1994, Lascaux was considered to be the oldest cave art, about 17,000 years. So we doubled that back in time with the discovery of Chevi. In this cave, we find about 2,000 figures, animals, couple of humans, and abstract signs. The abstract signs we don't know a lot about yet. Things like lightning bolts, the ladders that we saw, the blown discs, vertical lines. In Lascaux, we have probably the largest animals in the Paleolithic cave world. These large aurochs here that probably needed to be painted by building some sort of scaffolding to be able to stand and get to the axial gallery or this round part of the cave. Now, also in Lascaux, we have a human image, and the human image is very mysterious. So this human image is diagonal on the wall next to what appears to be a buffalo who has some sort of spear going through it and looks like its intestines are coming out. And then the bird with the line, we think that that might be a spear thrower possibly. Now what we're not sure is the bird, it's a bird face, it has a beak person. Is the person the hunter? Is the person laying over because it was killed? And I guess the other question is, why does it have an erect penis? And then there's also an unfinished image that probably came from a different artist and came later of what looks like maybe a woolly rhinoceros. We also have found sculptures in the Paleolithic world, the Old Stone Age. This is a very small sculpture, 4 inches tall, called the Venus of Willendorf. Willendorf is where it was found, near Germany. And this is a small carving in limestone. And the carving is of a plump woman, kind of the kind of woman you typically wouldn't see in a nomadic tribe, where you're generally pretty thin, you're moving around, you're not always finding food. And this woman here is probably the perfect woman for bearing a lot of children. She has large breasts. Her thin arms are cradling her breasts. We see her pubic bone and her vulva. We see these beautiful knees that were carved, no feet. We don't think feet were ever carved in it. And then the head is missing a face, but appears to have either hair or some sort of headdress running around the head. What I think the most interesting thing here is the belly button. The belly button was never carved. The belly button was some sort of imperfection in the stone that probably caused the artist to begin to carve this image. Why were they carving these images of women? We're not totally sure. Maybe they have some sort of property of bringing good luck or magic. Maybe the hunters are just lonely for women when they're out hunting. It's really hard to say. We do believe, though, that the art is not art as we know it today, but is actually a form of maybe shamanism, where the art on the walls might have some sort of sacred meaning to them, and then there might be some sort of healing going on, there might be some sort of learning going on that could be similar to the practices that we find of shamanism. And to find what this practice is, we go to parts of the world like the San Bushmen in Africa, and we see people living the way that we would have been living 30,000 years ago. And here is a shaman, and the shaman is doing a healing dance. Let's take a listen to this. Okay, so think about this. We're looking at early forms of music here, from clapping, from the rattling, from the dancing. By staying up at night with the light of the fire, they are changing, they are dancing through their dancing. And I'm going to clubs and dancing, I think, is somewhat similar to this. So as the people are dancing, as they are making music in the nighttime, they are feeling different, and this shaman then is figuring out what is wrong with them, either what is wrong with them emotionally, what is wrong with them physically, and he is feeling their energy coming out of them, what they call the na'um, what the Chinese call the qi, that energy that runs through us that is circulatory, pulmonary, electromagnetic, and it can be manipulated by people who have the sensitivity to feel it. So there's a possibility that the art that we see has some aspect of shamanism to it. And again, these are not just simply objects, but they are objects that inscribe into it some sort of spiritual realm and may have the possibility of transforming and transcending some human state of being. We see that for sure today in Native Americans in Kachina dolls. Kachinas are spirits in the Western Pueblo religious beliefs, and the Kachinas are dancers, masked members of the community, and the dolls are carved in the likeness of these spirits, and the spirits then live in these dolls. And there is real similarity, I think, in what you see here to what we maybe can see in these Paleolithic stone images. For our discussion, I want you to take a look at the lecture. I then would like you to travel through Chevi from a wonderful website named Don's Maps. Don's Maps is a comprehensive repository for cave art. Don has spent decades, and in his Chevi cave page, we find not only the really famous mural that we have been seeing, we see where the cave is at, several different photographs. We see where the cave was found by spelunkers, cave explorers who felt air coming from the ground. They rappelled down a dark hole, and then when they got into that hole, they discovered the cave that had been buried for 20,000 years. In that cave, they saw blown discs. They saw symbolic images that we don't know what their meaning is, claviforms, again, abstract marks. They see a cave bear with the ears that are in completely in perspective and not flat, really well drawn. We get to see what cave bears look like. There's a lot of stuff here. We see finger fluting, we see handprints. We see these beautiful horses that are finger fluted, woolly mammoths, all animals that have been extinct for about 20,000 years. Are they showing us animals as they're becoming extinct? Is this a form of Disneyland? Are they trying to create magic to keep these animals alive and to hunt them? The drawings are gorgeous, though. And Don does a complete job in finding as many different angles and all the art that he can find from different sources. And we see a lot of art, including a chamber that has no art in it, just the skull of a cave bear sitting on a rock. This is the only chamber with no art in it, and we're not sure why there's no art. And this carefully placed skull here has been sitting there for at least 20,000 years. And then when we get to the very end chamber, we see, of course, the cave lions and that great mural that is so well known. But what I want to touch on before we get to the last part of our discussion is the pendant here. So this is a pendant, a hanging rock, and on this rock we see the only humanish image. So there is a cave lion here, and the cave lion has a female human triangular vulva genitalia, and then we're seeing a two-legged human figure with a buffalo head. So what is this human with a buffalo head? What is this lion with human genitalia? And what are these images? What I want you to do is to watch this video, The Roots of Religion by Guinevere von Pritzinger. And I'm going to play a little bit of it here so you can kind of begin to get an idea of what we just saw.
Then and say, what about if they're putting lots of elaborate items into that burial? Impossible entities being depicted. So when I use the term impossible entities, we're referring to things that do not appear anywhere in nature. So there's no real world, they're not referring to anything in the real world. So something that's like, say, half animal, half human would be an impossible entity. And then, of course, trying to identify magic and spiritual themes in the art itself. And this is on portable pieces and, of course, My particular area of study, the cave walls. So let's quickly go over a couple of these, and I'll give you sort of some ideas of what we're seeing. For an elaborate burial, this one is a very famous burial, and it's an absolutely fascinating one. This is actually one of 3 burials from this site. This particular one is the adult male, and it's about 28,000 years old. It's from Russia. And if you'll notice, there's little white things all over his skeleton there. Those are ivory beads.
So we're looking at ivory beads that were buried with people. So around the same time that we see this cave art, we're also seeing humans being buried with these elaborate pieces with them. So those ivory beads, there were a couple thousand of them, and it would take a couple of thousand hours to make those bead necklaces out of ivory. We see that also in a burial of children too. Now the other thing, she talks about hunting magic in here. So in the hunting magic slide, what we're seeing is a buffalo with what appears to be spears in it. And at various times we see spear marks in these animals as if they're hunting them. And then the part that I want you to watch is the impossible entities.
Impossible entity, which has also been potentially identified as being a shaman. Now, the reason why they say that is the idea that what if they were wearing a mask? What if this, rather than being an impossible entity, is an actual depiction of a human partially dressed up like an animal? So you can see the legs have a much more human look. They don't look very bison-like, and yet the head has that very bison look. And the arms are also very human. So this is where they started to talk about the idea of shamanistic practices. Because shamans, of course, the term itself comes from Russia, but it's applied a lot to basically spiritual practices where there are specific members of your tribe who intercede on your behalf with an unseen world, whether it's to influence weather, whether...
Okay. So I want you to take a look at Shavi. I want you to look at this video. And then I want you to think about why we might paint half human, half animals. I want you to think about why gods and goddesses are often associated with animals. Is the role of the shaman working on our behalf, is this the beginning of a type of religion? And then I want you to think about why do we spend so much time painting these animals? I have a link to an article from cognitive psychology that believes that we are hardwired to see shadows as animals. I want you to consider that as well as you are working on the assignment. So, go through the lecture Living with Art. There is a multiple choice quiz. Take a look at the shaman lecture. Go through the discussion. And then I want you to do an assessment, and that will be a part of your assignments for this week. That will be the only thing you have to do if this is a 16-week course. If this is an 8-week course, you will have to do the second part, which I will lecture on in the next lecture. So I'll see you soon, everybody. Take care.